Hello everyone, and I've been working on a little side project as of recently, making me some paracord webs. What you're seeing here in the pink paracord is my first attempt at a couple webs. Kinda shabby, but I can stand on them, at least the tiny one. But I had grander visions. I want something bigger, I want something better, I want something cooler, like a web in the top of the tallest pine tree I could find. But then I remembered, I'm afraid of heights. So I decided to turn it on back a little bit. And that was probably a good idea, since this was the first time I'd ever made a large-scale web. So I decided I should put my web 7 feet up between a couple of good trees in the front yard. But first I had one question. How should I lay out the strings in my large web? What would be most efficient? What would be best? What could give me the smallest mesh size so I don't slip through? So I decided I'd make a few more webs, of course at a smaller scale. So I went outside with my pink paracord and I started making webs. I planned for my large web to be a triangle, so I planned out 3 possible mesh layouts I could use. The zigzag mesh, where I zigged and zagged the paracord across the triangle to form a basic mesh pattern. The center triangle, where I connected each face of the triangle with a strand of paracord, and then I zigged and zagged each individual corner. And then the spider web. If it worked for the spiders, it would probably work for me. So I would connect multiple strands in the center of the triangle, and then complete a spiral pattern all around them. After experimenting with each layout, I decided I'd go with the zigzag mesh because I believed I could get the smallest mesh size with the least amount of string used. So now it's time to make the big one. So I selected 3 big trees in close proximity to each other to put my web on. And here's a nice shot of the canopy up above where I decided to put my web. First, I started by wrapping my paracord around the trees 5 times to make a strong outer frame for the web. Then I started weaving a zigzag pattern out of my paracord from each side of the frame to the other. And then, once I was done with that, I started weaving another zigzag pattern perpendicular to the last one to create that mesh pattern I was going for. Then, I got lazy, and I stopped weaving in each new paracord strand. Before I went to send my web, I discovered that it was loose and spongy, and that wherever I sat, I left an indent in it. Also, that those lazily woven in paracord strings left me trapped underneath them as they came up whenever I sat down. While building the net, it was painfully slow to weave in each new strand, and it was almost impossible to tension those new strands. Also, it was hot and humid all day, and it even rained on me at some points. After spending all day building my web, I never wanted to see another web again. My issues were, I was sore from holding the spool above my head to weave each new strand. The weaving with the spool was very slow, as the spool wouldn't fit in between my tiny gaps in between my strands. I can't keep the web tensioned because my strings keep slipping. Even though I wrapped some of the strands around, they still slip. And also, since it's 7 feet up and I'm only about 6 foot, all the work is above my head or on a ladder. And it's humid. I woke up thinking I had been a bit too hasty to give up on my project, and I flipped over my office chair and I started practicing making webs, which I want to point out is not my own personal idea because it's actually a really good idea and I didn't want to take the credit for it. I took it from a web making YouTube tutorial, which after watching 30 seconds of, I decided this net thing can't be that hard, and I proceeded not to watch another video on the subject. What I found from practicing on the bottom of my chair was that instead of single wrapping my line around itself like I had been doing, if I made a figure 8 around each strand that I passed as I was weaving, the friction would be a lot greater and that it would a lot less likely to slip. And if I wrap the figure 8 multiple times, I can get it to almost stay completely still when I went to tension the lines on my web. Also, I found that instead of using one long length of string to make my web, I could use multiple lengths of string to make my web, just tying them off to different points of the web, or I can union knot them together using the fisherman's knot to continue my one long length of string. This eliminated my previous method of carrying the spool all throughout the weaving process and feeding the string off the spool. This meant I had to feed the spool through each hole in the web, which was very tedious and very time consuming. So the changes I implemented are as follows. I figure eighted every string that passed over one another. Every string that was attached to the frame of the web would be figure eighted multiple times to increase friction. And lastly, I would use multiple smaller strands of paracord and clover hitch them to the frame of the web. This would mean I wouldn't have to carry the spool whilst weaving. This fixed my major problems and only left me with a few problems that I could manage. So I went back outside and I took down yesterday's web and started anew. Then I started putting the paracord back up, but I made a change from the previous day's web. I changed my mesh layout. Instead of continuing with the zigzag mesh, I decided to go with the center triangle. This is because the zigzag mesh actually induced slipping of the cords as I tried to tighten them. This is due to the issue that the web frame is very similar to a ramp, and that instead of being a perfect triangle, all the sides are kind of bowed in due to the tension I put on them with the inner strings. So what the issue is that at some points, circled in green, the ramp is steeper than at the points that are circled in blue, where the ramp isn't as steep. And because of this, I can't create enough normal force at the point circled in green to generate enough friction to keep my ropes in place whenever I go to tension them. While at the spot circled in blue, I can generate more than enough normal force to generate enough friction to keep them in place as I tension them. This is the same exact idea as a book sitting on a ramp. As the ramp gets steeper, you'd expect there to be some point where it gets so steep that the book can't sit there anymore and the friction lets go and it slides down the ramp. And because the center triangle layout has a discrete zigzag in each corner, that means that the quote-unquote ramp, which is the frame of the web, doesn't get too steep and the normal force is great enough to generate enough friction. So as I tension the web, the strings don't move. So now with all that figured out, building my net was a breeze. And thanks to the changes in the weather and some drop in the humidity from the previous day, building my web changed from being an uncomfortable and arduous trial to a mildly therapeutic exercise in not falling off my ladder. Once I was done with my web, I was pleasantly surprised. It was nice and very well tensioned. The individual strands making up the web didn't move whenever I tried to move them, and it stayed tensioned after I got off of it and didn't sag. Now that I made one web, I wanted to make another, and I had some new ideas. See, my brother and my father had given me the idea of why not use turnbuckles to tension it. I can tension it after it starts sagging, after it's been sitting out there for an extended amount of time, and better yet, if I can tension it and untension it at my choosing, why can't I move it somewhere else in the yard and then just retension it? And to go at height later, I didn't have to build it at height now because I could build it at a comfortable height, maybe around my waist height, and then I could hang it up and then tension it with the turnbuckles. Or I could put it in between completely different trees if I wanted to. This idea was so interesting to me, I went out to my local hardware warehouse and I got me some oversized turnbuckles so I could mount my second web. Using my newfound web making knowledge, I made a smaller web below my first web. Making it smaller would give me a margin of error if I were to put it between different trees and have it a higher likelihood of having it to fit. Also, I chose to add a middle hole for a portal if I wanted to put it above my first net so I could go straight through the middle of it instead of having to climb on the sides of it. This second web came out very nicely, so I went about moving it between a couple of adjacent trees to my first web. This way, I could climb into my tiny web, and then I could climb into my much larger web a lot easier. This is about the final product for my web making mini project, though I do still need to cut the loose ends and burn the loose paracord. Also, I need to tighten up the mesh on the larger net, but that can be saved for later. I hope you enjoyed watching. Thank you very much. Lastly, my webs are already fulfilling their purpose, giving me a comfortable place to think as I wrote this whole video script while sitting in them.